Cannabis Common Sense, the show that tells the truth about marijuana and the politics behind its prohibition.
Welcome to another exciting edition of Cannabis Common Sense. We have another great guest tonight, Dan Harrer, who is a moving force behind the Jack Harrer Foundation, Jack Harrer Brands, and the son of Jack Harrer. And so it will be great talking to him a little bit later in the show. We have a couple interesting film roll-ins as well. So stay tuned as we bring on our infamous Dancing Cannabis Leaves.
I feel the force.
Okay, our first hemp news story tonight is from right here in America. More than 9 in 10 Americans support making cannabis legal for either recreational or medical purposes, according to nationwide survey data compiled by the marketing firm Digital Third Coast. 92% of those surveys favored either partially or fully legalizing marijuana. Only 8% of respondents opposed legalization. The findings are consistent with those reported by the Pew Research Center in April, which also determined that only 8% of Americans say that cannabis should not be legal for either medical or recreational purposes. National survey data published in April by the Quinnipiac University reported that 70% of registered voters favor legalizing marijuana for adults. Congressional Democrats on Tuesday introduced a bill to decriminalize all drugs at the federal level and shift authority from the Attorney General to the Secretary of Health and Human Services, though the bill stands little chance of making it through the legislative process. The measure, introduced by Representatives Bonnie Watson Coleman of New Jersey and Cori Bush of Missouri, also includes social justice provisions including records expungement and sealing and relief for people currently incarcerated or on supervision for certain drug-related convictions. The proposal would also eliminate the consequences associated with drug convictions, including denial of employment, public benefits, immigration status, driver's licenses, and voting rights. The measure was introduced ahead of the 50th anniversary of the declaration of the War on Drugs on June 17th back in 1971 by then Republican President Richard Nixon. In a statement, Representative Coleman described the war on drugs, quote, as a stain on our very national conscience since its inception, end quote. Begun in 1972 as a cynical political tactic of the Nixon administration, the war on drugs has destroyed the lives of countless Americans and their families. As we work to solve this issue, it's essential that we change tactics in how we address drug use away from the failed punitive approach and towards a health-based and evidence-based approach, Representative Coleman said in her release. In a story for Harper's in 2016, reporter Dan Baum interviewed Nixon's former chief domestic policy advisor, John Ehrlichman, who said that the war on drugs was a weapon against two of the disgraced former president's enemies, the anti-war left and black people. Ehrlichman said, quote, "We knew we couldn't make it illegal to be either against the war or black, but by getting the public to associate the hippies with marijuana and blacks with heroin and then criminalizing both heavily, we could disrupt those communities," end quote. Ehrlichman told Baum. He continued, quote, "We could arrest their leaders, raid their homes, break up their meetings, and vilify them night after night on the evening news. Did we know we were lying about the drugs? Of course we did," end quote. Ehrlichman said. Of course, Ehrlichman was convicted of being in the conspiracy to break into the Watergate Hotel and went to prison for several years. Currently, though, Democrats hold slim majorities in both chambers of Congress, and were the measure approved by the House, it would face very long odds in the Senate. Also on a federal basis, federal marijuana trafficking cases continue to decline in 2020 as more states have moved to legalize, a new analysis from the U.S. Sentencing Commission shows. In an updated fact sheet, the U.S. Sentencing Commission, which is an independent agency and judicial branch of the federal government, analyzed the number of drug trafficking convictions and found there were 1,118 cannabis cases in the fiscal year 2020. That's down 67% since 2016, shortly after the first recreational marijuana market started to mature. Advocates argue that the year-over-year decline corresponds with the growing number of states that have implemented legalization and also reflects a federal deprioritization of pursuing cannabis cases despite ongoing prohibition as the war on marijuana continues to lose voter support. In Montana, marijuana legalization opponents moved to drop a lawsuit that had been filed in Montana on behalf that sought to nullify an adult use marijuana legalization measure that was approved by Montana voters in November 2020's election. The suit sought to void the entirety of the initiative language, not just the portion of the initiative relevant to appropriating tax revenues. Litigants filed a similar legal challenge just prior to the election, but Montana Supreme Court declined to hear that case. 57% of Montana voters decided in favor of Initiative 190, legalizing the adult use marijuana market. In California, the California legislature has approved Democratic Governor Gavin Newsom's $100 million plan to help legal cannabis businesses transition from temporary to permanent licenses, the Los Angeles Times reported. Under the plan, which is part of the state budget, cities and towns can apply for grants to help provisional licensees obtain the California Environmental Quality Act, CEQA mandated environmental review needed for final license approval. According to the report, as of April, 82% of California cannabis businesses hold temporary licenses. The California Cannabis Industry Trade Group leaders say the funds, although needed, are inadequate and may not help licensees, some of whom may still face years of red tape to obtain their annual license. Also in California, a California State Personnel Board, or SPB, ruling limits positive cannabis drug tests in disciplining state workers. The precedential decision, which means it carries weight for further determinations, determined that urine samples do not accurately reflect whether an employee is under the influence of cannabis while at work. The SPB wrote, quote, "The board notes that it does not take a position on whether using marijuana is a good or a bad thing. The voters have spoken and legalized it in the state of California. Given that reality, state agencies are powerless to discipline employees like the appellate, whose test showed only that marijuana had been ingested or used sometime in the past, but not that the appellate was under the influence of marijuana while on duty," end quote. The California State Personnel Board decision number 21-01. It's Darren Harper versus the California Department of Transportation. Darren Harper, a Caltrans maintenance worker, brought the case against the Transportation Board after he was fired following a positive cannabis test. The SPB noted that Caltrans, quote, "did not contend that Harper was under the influence while on the job," end quote. And Caltrans never made such allegations in their notice of adverse action against Harper or during an evidentiary hearing. The board further acknowledged that Harper's behavior was, quote, "no different from the personal consumption of wine, beer, or other alcoholic beverages. It's a social and recreational activity that's legal and permissible in California," end quote, the board said. The SPB ruling does clarify that the decision neither covers federal government employees or federal contractors in California, nor law enforcement officers. This week, Vermont's Governor Phil Scott signed legislation into law providing financial assistance to social equity applicants seeking to enter the retail legal marijuana industry in Vermont. In nearby Connecticut, the state Senate members approved legislation, Senate Bill 1201, legalizing the adult use of marijuana and regulating its commercial production and sale. Connecticut's Governor Ned Lamont predicts Connecticut will adopt legal marijuana bills that he'll support within the week. In Ohio, the Ohio State Medical Board approved requests to allow patients diagnosed with Huntington's disease, spasticity, and severe muscle spasms and terminal illnesses to access medical cannabis legally in Ohio. From Texas, Texas Governor Greg Abbott signed legislation to expand the Texas Compassionate Use Program, the state's low THC medical cannabis program. House Bill 1535 allows patients with PTSD and all forms of cancer to qualify for the program. The measure also raises the cap on THC in medical cannabis from 0.5% to double 1%, as well as facilitate research programs. The new law takes effect in Texas on September 1st, 2021. Separate legislation to protect Texas parents who test positive for cannabis from losing their children was also enacted absent a governor's signature. This new Texas law also takes effect on September 1st. Louisiana's Governor John Bel Edwards signed legislation in law to remove the threat of jail time for low-level marijuana possession offenses. Louisiana's House Bill 652 reduces the penalty for the possession of up to 14 grams of marijuana for first-time as well as subsequent offenders to a $100 fine only. While there would be no possibility of jail time under the bill, these offenses would still be classified as misdemeanors. Louisiana's Governor Edwards said in a statement, quote, "In addition to carefully reviewing the bill, I also believe deeply that the state of Louisiana should no longer incarcerate people for minor legal infractions, especially those that are legal in many states that can ruin lives and destroy families, as well as cost taxpayers greatly," end quote. The new law takes effect in Louisiana on August 1st. Nebraska's marijuana activists are gearing up for a mass-scale campaign to put medical cannabis legalization on Nebraska's 2022 ballot after the legislature failed to pass a bill to enact reform this session. And since the state Supreme Court invalidated a measure that qualified the 2020 Nebraska ballot based on a statutory challenge, voters can expect to see multiple complementary initiatives that are currently being vetted by lawyers to ensure that opponents can't leverage the legal system to block the policy change again. Nebraskans for Medical Marijuana has brought on Kristen Eggers as the Signature Drive Director, and she told us that the plan is to hit the ground running on a mass scale starting on July 1st, where you just can't go anywhere without somebody being there to collect your signature if you're ready. To put the proposed constitutional amendment on the Nebraska ballot, advocates will need to collect about 124,000 valid signatures from registered voters. I went and testified before the Nebraska legislature back in 2017. I was called there by Senator Anna Wishart. Who's a Democrat in the unicameral legislature. Senator Anna Wishart and Adam Moorfield have been involved in the medical cannabis campaign, and the pair announced in December that they would also work to put the question of legalizing marijuana for adult use before Nebraska's voters in 2022. Nebraska's Attorney General sued Colorado in 2013 to stop Colorado, and the U.S. Supreme Court denied the review of that in 2015. Nebraska's governor and Republican Party are adamantly opposed to medical marijuana and legalizing cannabis. That is the end of our hemp news segment for tonight. And we have an interview now with Dan Hare, the son of Jack Hare, and we'll be talking to him about that. If you are a loved one, though, are looking for a doctor to help you qualify for medical marijuana, we have a physician referral service can direct you to doctors all across the country. Just give us a call at 503-235-4606. Again, that's 503-235-4606. Without further ado, here's Dan Hare as we work together to restore hemp. I'd like to introduce Dan Hare, who is the CEO of Jack Hare Brands and the son, one of Jack Hare's sons, who's actively producing cannabis products for the California market, and I know some other markets. Welcome to the show, Dan.
Thanks for having me. Good to see you, Paul.
Good to see you too. I was saying to you earlier today that your dad has been on this show probably a dozen different times. Every year we had our Hemp Stock Festival. Of course, he gave his last speech there many, many years ago. You could see he was in some pain at the end of that, and so it's got to be real painful for you, I know, to watch it.
It was more disturbing at first, but today I look at that as, if there was anything that my father, would have liked other than just growing old with his family, is that that he died doing exactly what he did, what he loved, and for whom he loved, and that is this cannabis community and this plant. And that, my father was he was a soldier during Korea, and I don't look at it any different. Him dying for his country, what happened on that stage that day, than fighting for this country and the rights of its people and its citizens and citizens around the world, that this plant was so important that he would give his last measure of devotion to seeing it become legal and available to all. So I think in some ways, um, you know, it was
It was
sadly a fit, it was sadly a fitting place for it to happen.
yeah, yeah. So how did you start and get involved with Jack Herer Brands? I know, I've known your brother Mark since we were both young men. I think he was just a teenager when I first met him, and I knew about your brothers and that you were always working with Jack in a lot of different ways. But how did you come to start the cannabis brand? How did that come to be?
Well, I think it really it came from an inspiration of my father post his passing. Um,
Right.
but growing up as a Herer, growing up as my father's son, and always being an advocate and an activist from the time that I was old enough to, collect signatures and register voters to vote. That path for this family, for myself, was always part of what we did. Obviously his passion, as I was still a young, or just coming out of my teens and into my 20s, it was just something that we did, but it was something that he lived. And over the
Yeah.
next,
And took us. I remember being driven to grocery stores and left for a while there in the LA area and gathering signatures at times with him.
yeah,
And
yeah.
so
So yeah, so
he cut his
start,
teeth on the initiative that made the ballot there in '72, which was the first time the marijuana issue was ever brought to the ballot there with
yeah,
the
since
first
prohibition.
Proposition 19. Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah. And it's
Yeah.
odd how the one then in '72 was Proposition 19. And then in 2010, just because of the sequential nature of California system, the next marijuana vote in terms of full legalization was Proposition 19.
Yeah.
Medical,
It's a,
but
it is a strange thing, but for me, you know, I never thought of monetizing my father. Um, or I should say my father really didn't look at monetizing himself, other than licensing his name to products during the 90s and 2000s, some of which he made on his own, which was like his double barrel pipe that everybody loved so much and that he really loved. And, and then licensing his names to other products like drinks and clothing and different apparel. And, um, but for me, it was, after he passed, it had been a couple of years and my family was still going through the grieving process of having lost him. And he
there were a lot of weird hangers on after Jack had his heart attack there. And I know that was very troubling for the family that there were these.
you're talking about the heart attack or the stroke? Because it started around the stroke, which is when it got really bad.
Yeah.
And then after he had his heart attack on stage at Hempstock, um, just some very strange things happened, and it
That's
really,
what I was talking about. I mean, I know the stroke preceded that by about 9 years,
yeah,
and he had struggled to regain, his capabilities, and had gotten better there toward the end too.
it took many years for him to start to be able to have some semblance of communication and regular thought processes, because anything prior to that, it was very difficult for him to process what people were saying, especially if they said it too fast, or he had a hard time really comprehending even things that he would read would frustrate him because he couldn't process it in a way that he could relate to it.
Yeah,
Yeah, prior to that first stroke, which also happened in Oregon, down in at the Wee Festival, I think, in Condi's farm. He
Yeah.
that he was so verbose and such a powerful speaker, and I always used one word during his lifetime to describe your dad, and it was always bombastic. I mean, I'd say people talk about Jack, say there's one word that describes Jack Hare, and that is bombastic. And so
Yeah.
I still,
That is one that I've never used, but I can certainly see that.
yeah,
You
yeah.
know, I just looked at him as as an unstoppable force. I mean, other than the stroke and the heart attack, he was relentless. He was just dedicated to the mission that he and Ed and you and all had fought for the previous decades, and it was just something that he wasn't gonna give up.
The way I met your dad was through Ed, through Captain Ed. I
Yeah.
had uh, hooked up first with Dana Beal and the Yippies, and there was an article in that called the CMI, or California Marijuana Initiative White Paper. So I saw that first, but then I was in LA. I came down. I was an Evergreen State College student at the time, and I had like a month between the summer, which semester which I'd gone to, and or quarter, and the fall quarter, and I went to LA to try to get on trivia game shows primarily. And I'm quite trivial, I could answer those trivia questions. I'm still pretty good at that. But anyway, I tried to get on several shows. I never made the cut. They give you these preliminary tests, which I passed, but then they have about 15 people a day to choose from. So
Right.
out of their 150 or so that they test. But the first couple of days I stayed in a hotel. Then I got a week in a KOA campground. And then I looked in the magazine. I saw the Reefer Raiders. I was listed in there as Evergreen Youth, and I saw the Reefer Raiders. And I actually
Yeah.
got a job working for Tom Hayden too, registering voters in front of the California DMV. And so I was doing this job, and I had to drive through the the
So
valley.
this was 80s. This
This is
was early 80s, maybe late 70s.
1982. And so
Yeah.
I went, and Ed invited me to stay in the blacklight room instead of the KOA.
Oh,
So I
hey,
said,
hey, when you can sleep inside Hudson Highs,
yeah,
you're an honored guest.
yeah. I was a great honor to hang out in the blacklight room. So for a couple days, but I was working in the day for Tom Hayden, making some money there. Anyway, and I was leaving in a couple weeks. But just as it was time for me to leave, Ed said, "Oh, you got to meet my partner. Go down the road, down Van Nuys, and turn off here. And there's a high country store." So I went there. I met your dad. I think he took me to a Sambo's restaurant, which or some restaurant.
Doesn't exist. Well, there was the Nat's Early Bite, which was right next door.
Yeah,
And
it was a little ways away. I don't think it was right next door, but maybe it was. Maybe it was. I mean, we're talking 1982, right? So
yeah,
39 years ago. But anyway, we both talked about how this initiative in Oregon had just failed to make the ballot. And I was in Washington. So I was thinking about doing an initiative in Oregon. I mean, in Washington. So we both, it turned out, independently moved to Oregon in 1984 to work on the marijuana initiatives, as they say, history from my point of view.
yeah.
But growing up with Jack, were you always in the LA area, or
Always been here. Haven't left. Always right here in the San Fernando Valley, with except for when I went to high school.
okay? And so, what was it like with Jack? And I know he had an epiphany of sorts in terms of when he changed and became a marijuana activist that he talks about in that movie that was produced by Anita Broderick at the Body Shop back
Yeah.
20 years ago now, I think. But what was it like with him before and after that epiphany on cannabis?
My dad was, just a normal, I guess dad in the 60s. Uh, and he was always very strict and not all that forgiving back then. And I think that probably came from his experience in the military. Uh, but he was not a cannabis user. He thought that everybody that was a hippie or a counterculturist, he thought they were just super unpatriotic, and that they had no place. So um, when he discovered pot in 1969, it was because he was conflicted after, finding my mother with cannabis in the house where his kids were being raised after their divorce. And he was deciding whether he was going to turn her into the authorities or not. And there was a young law student at the facility, at the apartments where he lived, that he confided in, and she just told my dad that he was a fucking idiot, and that he shouldn't do anything of the sort until he educated himself and experienced cannabis on his own. And he said, "Oh, I can't do that." But at the same time, um, I guess her calling him an idiot was attractive to him, because he developed a crush on her and continued to ask her out until she finally relented and said, "Okay, we can hang out, but you have to smoke pot with me." And he finally gave in. And that experience literally, uh, when they talk about a leopard changing its spots, that was the night that my father went through this transformation, that he realized that everything that he had ever learned had been a lie, and it was his new passion to find out why that lie existed and why everything was so different than what he had known. And that started him down the path to writing the book The Emperor Wears No Clothes in 1984, published 1985. And then
And he had that other book. When I first met him in '82, he gave me
a copy of Grass.
to rate cannabis on a scale of 1 to 10. I
Yeah.
still have that original 1982 autographed copy of that from way back when,
Yeah.
and a few others. But
Yeah. So that was originally published in 1973, when I was only 10 or 11 years old. And so for me, finding out about cannabis after my father discovered, his discovery of cannabis, and write this book, 2 or 3 or 4 years later, that book, the way that it was written, the way that it was, uh, you know, uh, I should say, printed and illustrated, it really lent itself to becoming a coloring book. And at
yeah,
10 years old, that was my coloring book. That's how I learned about cannabis. So I saw people getting high. I read about what it was like. I read about, all. So that was my initial education, was this coloring book at 10 or 11 years old. And so I never grew up with any fear of it, or who my father was, or what he did, or of marijuana. I just didn't have that correlation between the lies of prohibition and my own experiences. So
you're
you
given
know
specialist education, and I
yeah,
get, he and I both discovered him kind of separately. It kind of became, uh, his paper was one of the founding things out there. And like I said, I first saw it as a page in the Yippie newspaper overthrow called the CMI White Paper. And so that was the first iteration of hemp story I saw from Jack, and it just grew from there.
yeah. So it was a very normal, crazy upbringing that I had, that it didn't seem out of sorts, or anything. It was just the way that our life was, our family was, and it didn't feel, you know, terribly different or special, and unless my friends came over and were like, "Dude, you live really different."
Right. Right.
you know?
So tell me about the interval there when from the time he became a real activist and famous. How did you and your family relate? You have several brothers. How many brothers and sisters do you have?
I have 5 brothers and sisters, 2 sisters, 3 brothers. We're got about a 20-year span in ages. Um, and so it's like my father's initial family, and then it's our extended family.
Yeah. Yeah.
Through his later relationships in life.
Right. Well, I understand. I am. My father had 4 different sons with 4 different ladies, so
Yeah.
I can understand exactly how that can happen. But
Yeah.
um, but when Jack moved to Oregon in '84, he was working with Carol Lee Wilson, Bryce Garner, and they were putting together, the book, The Emperor Wears No Clothes. And at that point in time, no one had a laptop. They go to
No.
the store to make copies and the libraries, and
Yeah.
cut and paste literally meant scissors and glue. There was no computer to
Yeah.
do it. So
No, there
at
was
that
no
time,
desktop publishing.
no, there was nothing like that. At that time, I think BJ was about 3, CC and River were a little bit older,
Yeah,
but
they were
having
like 5 and 7. They were young.
yes, and so having stacks of paper in his house with little kids in there wasn't working out very well. And so we both moved to Oregon and started growing marijuana. It's the secret's out of the bag now. In fact, Ed Rosenthal wrote an article about it in High Times way back when in the mid '80s, but using a pseudonym. But but my grow house was only 2 blocks away from Jack's grow house, and I was just a single guy at the time in a 2-bedroom house. So he asked if he could come over to my house and kind of take over the house and put live
Oh, he was good at that.
and Carol Lee, and he did. And for about 2 months, he just took over my house, and I had to deal with that. But I did a little bit of research on the book. Mainly, the research I did ended up in a couple of later editions. I had found a lot of stuff about Jefferson and Washington and Franklin in the collected works that the Library of Congress had put together about them, and kind of made that available to him and Chris Conrad. But
Right.
I remember when the first issues of the book, The Emperor Wears No Clothes, came out, and we did several handouts of the magazine in conjunction with the marijuana legalization initiative of 1986. We made the ballot on November 1st of 1985, which is still a record of the earliest initiative to ever qualify for the vote in Oregon. And there's videos of that available actually. But then it was voted on a year later, and in that period of time, we went and handed out the initial copies of his book, and in every district that it was handed out, we lost overwhelmingly on a statewide level with 27% of the vote. But we won every district where the Emperor Wears No Clothes had been put door to door.
Yeah.
And
No, when you're an educated voter, you vote with an understanding of what it is that you're looking at and what the realities of things are. And it's not propaganda, and it's not, because it was something that you could research. It was something that you could see, and you could, you could understand it in terms that were like, oh, this is not varnished over. This is not a glossary. This is, uh, you know, this is the unvarnished truth. And it was powerful. And information and knowledge is powerful. And what do you do with that? Once you know this information, how do you ignore it? And so I would imagine that the people who received that information, once they knew it, once they read it and they saw it for themselves, how do you ignore it? You can't. You go out and you vote for it. And that's what happens.
I actually was the subject of a very political marijuana arrest in the summer of 1986. That's much akin to the arrest that Dennis Peron went through a decade later, in terms of the arrest was aimed at the campaign for the marijuana initiative. Well, when they arrested me, you know how they normally lay out guns and drugs and money. In my arrest, they laid out copies of your dad's book and the Oregon Marijuana Initiative hats and T-shirts and newspapers.
Yeah.
So
It's like, look at this evil stuff.
right,
Don't believe what you read.
right, exactly. But there's a lot more of that. I got to put it in my own book someday.
Yeah, the yellow and green Reefer Raiders colors were the gang signs of our of our tribe, of our community. You know, if you were wearing yellow and green and wore a white hat with a Reefer Raider on it, you were on the opposite side of the war on drugs.
Yeah, yeah. Every time I saw your dad over the years, when he started the hemp tour back east and would come through, I would always get him to autograph a copy of his book, whatever version it was along the way. I think I have about 25 different autographed copies of Jack's book, maybe more. But
Yeah,
uh, I'm holding on to my collection of those right now anyway.
I would as well.
Yeah. So tell me more about Jack Herer Brands. How did that start, and where is it today?
Wow. So Jack Herer Brands. Um, so about 2 years after my dad had passed, um, he saw fit to come pay me a visit. Let's just say, and he he came to me at night. I was sleeping, um, and all of a sudden I wasn't sleeping, and uh, there was my father above me, and he reached down and he grabbed my shirt that I was sleeping in, and he lifted me up off of my pillow and he shook me, and he said, "When are you going to say something?" As you know, as my father, if you knew, like he would grit his teeth and he would look
Yeah,
at you, and you'd see, the venom and spit coming out from, how visceral his reaction was.
many a time. I've seen it many a time.
And so he's just shaking me, and he's like, "When are you going to say something?" And he just threw me back down on the bed, and off he was gone. And I was just like, what the fuck? And that moment came with no instructions. It was just a blurb of energy, and I didn't really have an understanding of what to do with it. So I started, questioning myself and what I was doing, which was construction. I was working for the studios. Obviously, I'd spent my life as an advocate and activist along with my father for 30 years, but um, I was like, what did that mean? So I started the Jack Herer Foundation first, and then realized that a foundation has to get funded, and funding, in the cannabis industry was not something that was easy to come by. So it became, it was an unfunded, entity, and still is right now. It's really a fight to get available dollars to fund the ideas that I have for the foundation. So then I was like, oh, I'm going to have to start a company in order to fund the foundation. So I wanted to start a company called Herer Hemp, because hemp was, in 2013, 2014, it wasn't so controversial. It was sort of coming into its own kind of realm of access to some degree. And so I went in to start getting into hemp, and that was a little rough, to try to raise money, because, as you know, my father was not a man of excess or access to capital. He wasn't a well funded, activist.
No,
Uh,
no, we're all on a shoestring.
so
Making it
so
daily.
there wasn't really a lot there. So starting that, and I was like, okay, well, if I'm going to start this company, I'm going to have to get trademarks. And then I started looking up trademarks, and I found out that one of my father's friends had trademarked my father's name, which really was upsetting. And he told me one day, he's like, "Why do you want to start your own company? You should just come work with me. I already own your father." And I was like, this was just after my dad had passed, or a couple of years after I was like, "What do you mean you own my father?" And he's like, I have the trademarks. So that started a few year long battle uh, with getting the trademarks. And then from there, I was like, well, if I'm going to do this, I'm going to do what I can to take control of this name in the cannabis space. And that's when I started the original Jack Harrow brand. Um, I put my father's name. I'm sorry.
What year was that?
That was I started building it out in 2016. Started working on it 2017, putting all of the infrastructure together. 2018, we launched the brand in California, and I've just been working on the branding and putting products together and doing everything that I can to represent my father's true legacy, uh, in a sense, through this product. And I put my father's image on the product, so when people saw the name, that they would be able to, connect to who this person was, not just, some name of some potential genetic. And I wanted to make sure that if people were going to uh, buy a product that carried my father's name, that it was connected to this family and to my father and to the ideas that he had, and not just something for commerce, but something that connects to community. And so that's been where I'm at, and now I'm moving into other states with licensing opportunities to large scale producers that have the ability to really, um, one, connect with us, and two, to be able to put the product out at a level of scale that creates an economically affordable product that is known and trusted because of what it represents, because of who it represents, and because of the legacy in which it represents. And
So do
so
you just use the Jack Harris strain, or do you have other mixes? Do you, or can you?
well, we do have uh, an original Jack that we produce. It is held and protected, and through the nursery that produces all of the genetics. It's held in tissue culture to make sure that it's preserved. And then we have, about 20 different Jack crosses that we've never released, because we have to figure out, one, what would the consumers really gravitate toward, and then being able to put it out at a level of scale that you could actually affect a part of the market with. So it's a little slow coming on the crosses, but we're looking to do that this year. Um, the newest things that are happening are in the state of Colorado, um, and I have great partners there. Um, and
You're in California and Colorado now. Are you in other states?
I am working on other states at this very, very minute.
There was one or two you said don't talk about, so we won't. But
Yeah.
I do want to mention that you guys won the Emerald Cup, which is the biggest cannabis competition in America and the world. And tell us about that.
Well, it was the first year. I want to say it was the end of the first year of production of our products here in California, and we were still working on formulations and trying to get our cartridge to be a true representation of the flower itself. And I was not ready for the Emerald Cup, and I didn't think the product was, because I really had a very specific thing in my head with regards to what I thought people should smell and taste and experience when they use this product, and I was being, you know, diligent and very critical of what it is that we were putting out that represented this name. And one of the girls that worked in our offices decided that I was out of my mind, and that she unbeknownst to me, submitted our cartridge, our distillate cartridge, to the event, and I didn't find out literally until the night of the night of the awards, and they said, hey, by the way, we submitted some entry into the Emerald Cup, and I was like, okay, I was like, I didn't think we were ready, but I was having a good weekend. The brand was getting great recognition there. People loved the fact that when they came to our booth, that they were connecting to the family and to my father's legacy, and not just a company that would take my father's name, put it on their product, whatever that product is, and pretend that they represented my father. And it really gave this authenticity to what it is that we were doing, and it made me feel great that people were recognizing this amongst all others who were these, I consider them all bootleggers, and
Well, I was down at the Expo Weed in Santiago, Chile, which is the biggest one in Latin America, and they had a booth there for the Jack Herer Gross Shop stuff. I took pictures and sent it to you, your family. They weren't happy, but there was also a Jack Herer sandwich. In one store I went in, they had a Jack Herer sandwich and a Jorge Cervantes sandwich. Jack's was a little more expensive, but I can understand when you have that kind of branding in our global community, that especially if you're trying to steer it into being responsible, productive, and your foundation giving back to the group. That
well, I think it's just really funny how somebody could stand and talk to me and tell me about how much they appreciate everything that my father did, and they wouldn't be doing and they wouldn't be doing what they're doing without his inspiration and his activism. And then in the next word say, I grew $1 million worth of jacket last year and bought a home and sent my kids to college, but didn't think for a second that that was disrespectful to his family, who actually has the rights to that name.
If they weren't doing their part to spread this plant and outside of enriching themselves, because obviously Jack never lived to that. He gave back every penny and provided great inspiration.
Yeah, I'm willing and have been willing to work with groups and folks and companies to license the name and to work responsibly with its visibility and its acceptance within the space, and to work with people who loved my father, who appreciated the work and the efforts that he put in, I would rather build relationships with these folks than any animosity. But with the way that industry and business is going, I don't see that being an easy trek moving forward. So I really wanted to put out a brand that represented this family, that represented my father, that did it in all the right ways, to the best of my ability, and to make sure that this family that supported my father, that uh, went through all of the trials and tribulations that he went through personally, it didn't stay with him. It affected us all. It affected all of us every day. And the things that he went through, we went through. The things that we went through, he went through. And so creating this brand was personal, and it was important. And to be able to create something that is long lasting, and I hope that I continue to do the work that's necessary to solidify this brand in the place that it should be, and that is recognized by the entire cannabis community, be it grower, producer, manufacturer, seller, or corporation. That to work with these folks, to embrace the name, to continue to do the things that makes the name great and important, and a part of the foundational elements of the cannabis industry, and to do it with, you can still put out a product that is cannabis, and at the same time educate people and inform people, and use that information and access of coming into people's lives every day through um, you know you know whether it's manufacturing or growing, or whether it's at the retail arena, that you have the ability to continue to change minds and change lives for the better. And if I can get these companies that are currently using my father's name without license to embrace that idea too, that the idea and the name of Jack Herer and his influence will continue to affect change responsibly, not just in your communities but around the globe. And that's really what I hope the overall um, you know purpose and vision of this company is something that not only gives us the ability to enjoy something from a medicinal or recreational standpoint, but to be able to wear clothes that are made from it, to be able to drive cars that have parts made from it, to be able to have education in schools that elevate consciousness and understanding instead of falsehoods and fiction. And I think that being able to create a product and a relationships with companies that continue the parameters of the things that my father set forth, that many of us still follow today, and that is create a product, educate people on it, educate the opportunities that could come from it, and look to the future and bring it to its full utility in it. And I think that's the relationship that I would like to build with growers and manufacturers and corporations around the world as this continues to expand to a truly global market, from a manufacturing, shipping, banking, all of the different things that we need to have a true international business, and be able to do that with truth and fact and enlightenment, rather than the fear of falsehoods and fiction.
I got to say that I'm sure your dad would be very proud of what you're doing and the branding. I'm glad you're able to put that quality product out there. Obviously, it's a good product. I've never had a chance actually to sample it myself, but I understand. Well, maybe I had a couple puffs in the booth in NOCO one year, but I've got to say I'm very happy you're carrying that on. You also have a golf tournament. You must play golf.
Well, it was,
Golf Cup or something, right?
yeah, it's called the Jack Herer Foundation Golf Tournament,
Is that
and
in the
we started it a couple of years back, just before Corona. And for golf, it was one of the very few things growing up that this family, my two brothers and my father, could do together. Um, and he taught us all how to play golf initially at Van Nuys Golf Course, and but it was the one thing that we could do together that had nothing to do with being an activist or collecting signatures or selling paraphernalia. It had nothing to do with anything other than being father and son. It was one of those times in a month or a week or in a year that we would have together, that we would just have fun and just enjoy something other than cannabis. And it was that father son thing that we got to share. And it's the thing that I can do to connect to what he shared with me. And at the same time, I can educate people on cannabis by helping to fund the foundation and continuing to spread the word of cannabis, and hopefully continue to change the world.
So I know people can find you on Instagram, right? What is your Instagram site?
Well, it's Jack Herer Brands on Instagram,
Okay.
or original Jack Herer on Instagram.
Okay.
And um, other than that, it's the jackhererfoundation.org.
Okay.
We are a 501c3 nonprofit, and unfortunately, sometimes you know, it, it's tough to be a foundation.
I
So,
understand of
I would appreciate all of your support out there, and
the jackharerfoundation.org.
the jackhererfoundation.org. Well, it's actually jackhairfoundation.org.
Oh, just Jack Hair. Okay.
Yeah.
So Jack Hair. No, the other word's not there.
It'll come up if you look for it. It'll direct you to it.
Yeah. I want to thank you for coming on, Dan, and thanks for carrying on your dad's legacy. And I know your whole family's working at this. Say hi to Mark when you see him, and when you're coming through Portland, I hope to get you by my office and twist your ear a little bit.
I can't wait, and I look forward to that moment.
All right. Thank you, Dan, and continue to work to restore hemp. Good night.
Every day.
Every way. Okay. I think Bill has everything he needs there. He'll pop back in.
This is Mr. Henry Ford in 1941 with Popular Mechanics magazine showing off his car made from hemp.
Well, come climb the mountain with me. Come see what we can see. Come climb the mountain with me, and then we will all be free. Some men are born to lead, some men have destiny. Some men plant the seed, and some men set it free.
Here we had 92,000 cars a day, thousands of people parking behind the FBI building, and they arrested us and they said, you cannot do this. I said, well, I'm not going to pay you a fine and go on probation. So I did 15 days in prison rather than give them a $5 fine.
Wow, that's kind of like telling Jesus you can't practice on Sunday.
It was a fine line. So come climb the mountain with me. Come see what we can see. Come climb the mountain with me, and then we will all be free.
Jack here and Ed Adair.
Well, hi, guys.
They must be on the hemp tour. Are you on the hemp tour?
One man said we must hear. One man's voice was clear. One man heard the call. His vision speaks for all.
The number one plant for paper, fiber, and fuel from the natural cycle had been outlawed, that somehow the synthetic cycle had won, when the number one thing in the natural cycle could outproduce it and completely clean up the atmosphere. So my partner, Captain Ed, who had become my partner in 1973 and doing the politics of this, said, we have to teach everybody in the world. So we went around and told everybody. Yeah. But it was a slow process.
So come open your eyes with me, and come see what you can see. It's time for the world to know the emperor wears no clothes. Come open your eyes with me. It's time for you to see. It's time for the world to know the emperor wears no clothes. It's time for the world to know the emperor wears no clothes. The emperor wears no clothes. The emperor wears no clothes. The emperor wears no clothes.